Hello, everybody. Dean the Turkey Legster here. Welcome to the first Once Upon a Turkey Leg of 2025. I've got a special edition, a different edition, uh, going on tonight, and I'll get started with the story, and I'll let you know what that is. Um, yes, this is the first Once Upon a Turkey Leg of 2025, and is also my first live stream period of 2025. I streamed a couple nights ago for Let's Talk Turkey, of course, on New Year's Eve, and had um, a good stream a couple nights ago. And So let me welcome friends in. I see some friends in the chat. Dave Stragan, welcome in. Hello. Jason Thibodeau, welcome in. Hello. And Tina McNeil, hello. And Chuck. And hi to Chuck. So yeah, I hope 2025 has been okay for you so far. We're only on the 2nd of January, but Michelle, welcome in. Hello. Hopefully it's been well for you, and yeah, I will remind you later of an announcement that pertains to the channel that I made on Tuesday night, just to remind you, and I will have a community post going up. It's scheduled to go up in a little bit, but I will remind you before I go off. It does relate to the channel. Julie McCowan, welcome in. Hello. Curtis family, Chris, hello. Welcome in. Um, yes, 2025, and I talked the other night kind of about some of my dreams and goals for the new year, and yeah, so one of the things for the channel is that this stream Thursday nights is not going anywhere. It will happen um, Thursday night and at 9 o'clock. So absolutely, and Let's Talk Turkey will continue on most Tuesday nights. And then I also announced that I am launching the first Tuesday of each month. Instead of Let's Talk Turkey, my new show on that first Tuesday of each month is going to be the Pixie Dust review, and that will launch coming up in February the 4th. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'll remind you more about that, talk about that later on a Let's Talk Turkey. So yeah. So Julie, absolutely, yeah, still a little confused. This is actually Thursday, Julie. Um, it's not that I just go around believing everything, but my phone there says Thursday, January the 2nd. So, but yeah, it just seems the holidays, falling and they're in the middle of the week, and then like I think it hasn't been as bad for me because unfortunately I'm not working. I don't have a job that I don't have to kind of remember, okay, I'm just kind of, that's another of my goals is to finally get working again after my health stuff of last year. Um, exactly, Julie. 2025. Make sure you write 2025. Mark Langenkamp, welcome in. Happy New Year. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start with the story. Let me just briefly introduce it, and I'll get to reading, as it might be a little longer than normal. Um, so a couple of the places that I visit around Central Florida, well, in my area, there's three of those little lending libraries. They're just small. They have a couple shelves of pretty small books. They sit on a post usually, and they have like doors with some like glass in the front, or maybe it's like a plastic a pane or whatever. But they're little free lending libraries, and you can take a book, leave a book, whatever. And I have at one of them recently, or it's been a couple months now, but there's actually one of those out at the Fort Christmas historical um, park that I like to go to. And they had, of all things, and that was such a pleasant surprise, they had the collector's edition of collector's edition storybook for The Prince of Egypt. And I absolutely was beside myself, because I was have been thinking the last couple years it'd be nice to get a storybook for, you know, some of the DreamWorks films, and The Prince of Egypt came up as on my list as something I'd like to find, but I haven't even found this on like Amazon. So I'm thinking it was, you know, came out and but so I'm going to be reading The Prince of Egypt, the collector's edition storybook for you guys tonight here on Once Upon a Turkey Leg. Now, as I indicated a minute ago, this seems like it may be uh, a lot longer. I am going to read the whole book, so it may be kind of a lengthy reading tonight. Um, you know, so if you need to leave and come back to this on the replay, I completely understand. Julie Durable, welcome in. I will pause every so often to check chat, but I am gonna just concentrate on reading through the story. And this Prince of Egypt is, of course, based on or it tells the story of Moses out of the Bible, from the book of Genesis, or book of Exodus. So here we go, guys. Tonight's story, The Prince of Egypt. Long ago, a mighty Pharaoh ruled the land of Egypt. He was a man of power and dreams, a man who saw himself through history's eyes. And so he sought to build an empire greater than any seen before. There would be giant monuments and temples in his honor, as if he himself were a god. But large monuments are made of many bricks and hard labor. Pharaoh Seti needed slaves to do his work. The slaves he found were Hebrews, for he saw that Egypt was filled with them. He set taskmasters over them with whips to sting their shoulders as they lifted straw, sand, water, and mud to build glory to his name. But when the Hebrew numbers grew, Seti became afraid of their strength, and so he devised a terrible solution. He sent his soldiers into Goshen, where the slaves lived, and ordered them to kill all the newborn Hebrew boys. One Hebrew mother was brave enough to hide her infant boy for 3 months. But one day the soldiers came too close. Together with her 2 older children, Miriam and Aaron, Yocheved made the hardest decision of all to save her child. She must send him away. Hush now, my baby. Be still, love, don't cry. Sleep as you're rocked by the stream. Sleep and remember my last lullaby, so I'll be with you when you dream. With that sweet song of prayer, the boy's mother laid him in a basket and set him adrift on the river Nile. Gently the water swept the basket and its precious cargo from her hands into the swift current. But little Miriam would not let her baby brother out of sight. She ran along the river bank, anxiously watching the basket's perilous journey. She gasped aloud when it swirled on a wave, dashing between a pair of battling hippos. Yet whether by fate or by chance, the basket floated safely past this danger and many more. Snapping crocodiles, fishermen's nets, the bows of great ships, none of these prevented the basket from staying on its protected course. Indeed, the sweeping oars of a huge barge at last pushed the basket out of harm's way and sent it floating with sudden gentleness toward the very steps of Pharaoh's palace. Jeanette, Sebastian the crab, hello, welcome in. There in the water garden, the queen, her handmaidens, and little Prince Ramses were taking their daily refreshment when the basket came to rest. Miriam gasped with fear as she watched the queen herself draw the basket near and lift its head. With a soft cry of delight, the queen gazed at the sweet cheeks and sleepy eyes of the baby nestled inside. "Come, Ramses," she said without hesitation. "We will show Pharaoh your new baby brother, Moses." And so the child had a new home, a new family, a new name. Miriam was relieved and grateful to see the miracle of her brother's rescue. From her hiding place in the tulle reeds, she echoed her mother's lullaby with her own song of hope. Grow, baby brother, grow, baby brother, come back some day. Come and deliver us too. Hello, Jennifer. Welcome in. Hello. Happy Thursday. And Stephen, Rocky Singleton, welcome in. Hello. Let me see if I missed anyone else. Welcome to Once Upon a Turkey Leg. I am reading Prince of Egypt, the Collector's Edition Storybook. Welcome in. The Pharaoh and the Queen treated Moses well, for they considered him a gift from the gods. They raised him alongside their own son, Ramses. And in the eyes of his loving parents, Moses was equal to his brother in nearly all things, a true prince of Egypt. He lived in splendid rooms made of alabaster stone and perfumed with incense. Remembering no other, he was proud of his home. In it he felt noble and strong. Moses and Ramses grew up as boys do, studious in some things, reckless in others. One of the greatest pleasures was playing tricks on the palace priests, Hotep and Hui. Another was chariot racing. Ugh. Hey Ramses, how'd you like your face carved on a wall? Someday, yes. How about now? Moses pulled his chariot sharply to the side, almost pinning Ramses against a temple wall. If it's fun you want, Ramses said as he moved to retaliate, but Moses skidded to a stop, leaving Ramses' chariot to plummet down a sand dune. Laughing, the two boys were soon at it again, racing along another wall. But the wall was not built to withstand the onslaught of two boys in chariots. It burst apart with a mighty force. A tidal wave of sand spilled down onto the plaza below, where Hotep and Hui were busy performing a ritual to sanctify the temple. Moses and Ramses surfed down the mountain of cascading sand, which completely destroyed the temple and buried Hotep and Hui into the bargain. Why do the gods torment me with such reckless, destructive, blasphemous sons? Seti was furious. Ramses started to answer, but Seti would not allow interruption. I seek to build an empire, and your only thought is to amuse yourselves by tearing it down. The fault is mine, said Moses. I goaded Ramses on, and so I am responsible. Responsible, retorted Seti. Do you know the meaning of that word, Ramses? When I pass on into the next world, you will be the morning and evening star. One damaged temple does not destroy centuries of tradition, said Ramses defiantly. But one weak link can break the chain of a mighty dynasty, bellowed Seti, and with a wave of his arm, Seti dismissed his older son. But Moses stayed and spoke to his father. All he cares about is your approval. I know he will live up to your expectations. He only needs the opportunity. Seti considered Moses' words and then dismissed him too. Go now, he said. I shall see you both tonight. Blumenchiza, hello Richard, welcome in. Welcome in. I can see it now, Moses said later, teasing his sulking brother. There go the pyramids. Single-handedly you will manage to bring the greatest kingdom on earth to ruin. But Ramses refused to be cheered. Their father had hurt him deeply. Tell me this, Moses, he said, moving to the balcony where his brother stood. Why is it that every time you start something, I'm the one who ends up in trouble? But Moses wasn't paying attention. Hotep and Hoi were walking just below the balcony, and Moses had noticed a tempting bowl of pink fruit punch nearby. With a devilish look, he dropped a balloon filled with the liquid right onto their heads. Ramses, get down here! I think you owe us an apology, yelled Hoi. Oh, my new thing, moaned Hotep. Moses handed Ramses the entire bowl of punch and said, You might as well. And Hotep and Hoi were drenched again. The brothers enjoyed a good laugh until Moses mentioned that they were probably late for their father's banquet. Moses and Ramses tried to sneak into the banquet hall, but when the door opened, they were greeted by a huge cheering throng. Ah, the young princes, said the queen, as if they were right on time. She hugged Ramses and whispered, You were just named the Prince Regent. You are now responsible for overseeing the temples. Then she turned to Moses and said, Apparently someone thought he just needed the opportunity. Moses stepped forward and shouted, My lord Pharaoh, I propose that the high priests offer tribute to their new regent. At that, the two magicians looked at each other and grinned mischievously. The Midian girl, said Hotep to Hoi. Go get her. While Hoi went backstage, Hotep began their magical presentation. After a blast of smoke and the yank of a curtain, Hotep revealed a beautiful Midianite girl, bound at the wrists with a rope. Let us inspect this desert flower, said Ramses, but the girl was too strong for her captors. When Ramses approached her, she tried to bite him. More like a desert cobra, said Ramses. Shrinking back, Ramses decided to give the girl to Moses instead, glad to be rid of her. I won't be given to anyone, the girl exclaimed, pulling on the rope with all her strength. Especially not to an arrogant, pampered palace brat. I demand you set me free. Moses watched as she backed towards a large reflecting pool. With a shrug, he let go of the rope, laughing as she fell into the water. But later, when Moses saw that the Midianite girl had run away, he did not call the guards. Instead, he allowed her to escape from the palace and, intrigued, began to follow her. Moses hurried down the darkened streets of Goshen, the small cramped part of the city where the Hebrew slaves lived. He was far from the palace now. Moses had never had a reason to come to Goshen before. Around a corner he suddenly stopped, seeing the beautiful desert girl with a camel up ahead. From the shadows he saw her approach two Hebrews who were drawing water from a well. "Please," the girl said, "I need water. I have a long journey ahead of me." "May God protect you," the Hebrew woman replied. As the girl led her camel off toward the desert, Moses came out of his hiding place and approached the well. His eyes were still following the Midianite girl when the sound of a shattering pot brought his gaze abruptly to the Hebrew girl before him. She gasped, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I did not expect to see you here at last." It was Miriam, Moses' sister, now grown up and overjoyed to see her younger brother. With her was Aaron, who feared to watch this confrontation between his sister, a slave girl, and a prince of Egypt. Joyfully Miriam continued, "I knew you cared about our freedom." "Freedom?" Moses said, laughing. "Why would I care about that?" "Because," said Miriam haltingly, "you're our brother." She reached out to touch Moses' arms. "Our mother set you adrift in a basket to save your life." "Save my life? From whom?" "Ask the man you call father," Miriam said bitterly. "How dare you!" shouted Moses as he pushed her to the ground. With that he turned to walk away. But then something teased his memory. A voice, both familiar and strange. He stopped, stunned by all that stirred within him, as he heard Miriam sing, "Hush now, my baby, be still, love, don't cry." The same lullaby that his mother had sung long ago. Moses ran back to the palace. Its gleaming stones and treasure-filled rooms should have reassured him. But the slave girl's words stuck in his thoughts and then in his dreams. Moses fell into a troubled sleep. He saw his father send soldiers with sickles into Goshen. He watched the soldiers as they snatched crying babies from the arms of Hebrew mothers. And he saw Jochebed run down to the Nile with her little boy and set him adrift in a basket. In his nightmare, he watched as the guards threw other babies into the Nile, where crocodiles waited with hungry jaws opened wide. Then Moses too tumbled down into the river, down toward those sharp teeth, a terrible sound ringing in his ears, until he awoke with a start. Moses grabbed a torch and ran through the palace. For the first time he truly saw the images that had always been painted there on the painted walls. Wait, that had always been there on the painted walls. Here were the crying babies. Here was his father, the mighty Pharaoh, ordering the guards to carry out his terrible decree. It was all as he had seen in his nightmare, and as if the slave girl had said, and as the slave girl had said. Moses fell to his knees. Then he felt the touch of a hand on his head and heard Seti's voice. The Hebrews grew too numerous. They might have risen against us. Father, tell me you didn't do this, Moses pleaded. Oh, my son, Seti said, holding him. They were only slaves. Moses backed away in horror. This man could not be his father. Oh. The next morning, Moses accompanied Ramses to the building site of the temple that they had destroyed, and that Ramses was now in charge of rebuilding. I will make this temple more grand, more splendid than any other monument in Upper or Lower Egypt, Ramses was saying proudly. But for Moses, everything had changed. Ramses' words were meaningless as he looked around and saw the suffering of Hebrew slaves. On a platform above, a guard shouted at an old man, I'll make you move. Ah! cried the slave as the whip hit his shoulders. Ramses was still speaking, but Moses heard only the slave's echoing cry and the relentless cracking of the whip. When he could not stand it any longer, Moses ran to the scaffolding and leaped on the guard's back. The force of his weight sent the guard tumbling far down to the ground below. He lay lifeless on the ground. Then Moses ran. He had killed a man, an Egyptian. The palace was no home for him now. But his brother Ramses followed. Moses! 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 He called as he raced to catch up with his younger brother. Let me go, Moses shouted. You saw what happened. I just killed a man. I will make it so it never happened, Ramses declared. I am Egypt, the morning and the evening star. But Moses turned away. What you say does not matter. I'm not who you think I am. Despite Ramses' pleas, Moses could not stay. Goodbye, brother, Moses said sadly as he took one last look, and then he fled. Massive dunes of sand, taller than pyramids, and vast empty plains dwarfed the tiny figure of a man, stumbling toward nothing. Here there were no chariots to carry him, no companions or comforts. There was only the blazing sun, which looked down on Moses, a lonely figure in the vast, dry wilderness. At night he huddled under a thin coat, shivering in the cold. By day he made his way over rocky, desolate terrain. He stepped on a sharp rock and his sandal broke. Then he tore off his sandals, his necklace, and every trace of his old life. They meant nothing here. But one thing he kept, a turquoise ring that Ramses had given him the night of the banquet. He stood staring at it as the winds began to whip at his shoulders and face. He barely noticed as a storm of sand pushed him down, swirling around him until the sand covered him completely. Munch, munch, snort. A determined camel snuffled through the sand hills, looking for lunch. A patch of dry grass caught its attention. The camel chomped happily and pulled and pulled. Up from the sand came Moses. He opened his eyes just in time to see the camel spit out a clump of his hair and trot away from its disappointing meal. He stumbled after it and with his last remaining strength grabbed onto a saddlebag that glistened with shiny drops of water. The beast walked on, pulling Moses through the desert until at last they came to a large trough filled with cool water. Moses plunged his face into the water and drank. When he looked up, he was eye to eye with a sheep, who was happily drinking there also. Then Moses heard a child's cry. "Help! Stop!" cried a little girl. "Let our sheep drink!" shouted another. Shepherds were pushing 3 girls away from a well, wanting their own thirsty sheep to drink first. Moses stood up. Although the girls were strangers, he wanted to help them. Moses gave the beasts a whack and sent them running, with the shepherds in desperate pursuit. Exhausted, Moses leaned against the well for support and fell in. The 3 girls pulled with all their strength to get the funny man out of the well. Soon their older sister came to help them. But when she saw the man they had hoisted up, she cried out in surprise, "You!" With a playful smile, the Midianite girl whom he had once dunked at the palace sent Moses tumbling back into the well. Her name was Zipporah. Later, hoisted from the well and brought bedraggled to the tents of the Midianites, Moses reluctantly allowed a group of elderly women to scrub him clean. "Let me through! Let me through! I want to see him!" boomed the voice of a man. As Moses wrapped himself in a towel, a fellow with a warm smile entered the tent and hugged him. It was Jethro, Zipporah's father, and the high priest of Midian. "Ah, you are most welcome," he said as he lifted Moses off his feet. "You have been sent as a blessing, and tonight you shall be my honored guest." Then Jethro threw a warm blanket over Moses' shoulders and was gone. That night, Jethro welcomed Moses with feasting and dancing. As the Midianites bowed their heads, Jethro said a prayer. "Let us give thanks for this bountiful food. And let us also give thanks for the presence of this brave young man whom we honor here tonight." "Please, sir," said Moses quietly, "I wish you wouldn't. I have done nothing in my life worth honoring. First, you rescued Zipporah from Egypt. Then you defend my younger daughters from brigands. You think that is nothing? Asked Jethro, then offered his own reply. You must look at your life through heaven's eyes, he said firmly, knowing that it was God who brought meaning to their lives. Once a prince of Egypt, Moses now found in Midian a new family and a new home. He learned the shepherd's life. In simple tasks, he began to see the pattern of work, laughter, and care that made up a worthy existence. And he and Zipporah found love in each other, and they were married. The years that followed were happy. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome in. And Happy New Year. Then one morning Moses arose early. With a gentle kiss for the sleeping Zipporah, he left to tend his flock, still feeling sleepy himself. Seeing that one of the sheep had strayed, he went looking for it. He could hear its bell, but he could not see where it had wandered. Grumbling good-naturedly at the wayward sheep, Moses followed the sound into a small canyon. There he stopped, dismayed. Before him a small bare thorn bush burned with fire, yet it was not consumed. Perplexed, he reached out cautiously, then put his hand into the flames of the burning bush. But his hand was not burned. Oh. Then a great voice called out to him, Moses! Moses! Here I am, said Moses. He held out his staff to defend himself, for he was frightened. Moses looked around. Who are you? He asked. And then the voice spoke again. The bush burned more brightly. I am the God of your ancestors. I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt and have heard their cry. I have come down to deliver them out of slavery and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey. And so unto Pharaoh I shall send you. Awestruck, Moses dropped his staff and backed away, feeling unworthy and afraid. Who am I to lead these people? He asked, offering excuses and doubts. Oh, Moses, I shall be with you when you go to Egypt, God said. Take the staff in your hand. With it you will do my wonders. I shall be with you, Moses. As these last words echoed, Moses looked up. The bush no longer glowed with fire, but instead flowered with new life. He paused in awe and silence. Moses took up his staff and ran back to his Midianite home. He told Zipporah all that had happened. Moses held her face in his hands, searching for a way to explain why he must return to Egypt. Look at your family, he said, pointing outside their tent to the Midianite people who were working, talking, laughing, going about their daily lives. They are free. They have hopes and dreams and the promise of a life with dignity. This is what I want for my people. Zipporah looked into her husband's eyes. She saw his determination and his goodness. "I'm coming with you," she said. And so they journeyed back across the desert until they saw the giant faces of the statues peering over the soft sands. They were in Egypt, where they could see that the Hebrews still suffered in slavery and unending labor. The sight of the taskmaster's whips moved them and strengthened their resolve. At last, Moses and Zipporah entered the palace. The air swelled with music celebrating the festival of Ra, an Egyptian god. But the great hall grew silent as Moses approached the Pharaoh's throne, where he found that Ramses, not Seti, was Pharaoh. Ramses ran to his brother with outstretched arms. "Moses," he cried, "I took you for dead." For a moment Moses forgot his very purpose for returning. The love he saw in his brother's eyes seemed reason enough. But when Ramses tried to welcome him as a prince of Egypt, Moses knew he must focus on the task God had given him. "Ramses, in my heart you are my brother," he said gently. "But things cannot be as they were. I am a Hebrew. I am here because the God of the Hebrews commands that you let the Hebrew people go." "Commands?" Ramses replied, stunned and hurt by Moses' words. Moses held high the staff in his hand. "Behold the power of God," Moses said, and he threw the staff down on the palace floor. Writhing and twisting, it changed into a snake. The crowd was impressed by the miracle, but Ramses was not. "Very well, Moses," Ramses said dismissively. "Otep, hoy! Give the snake charmer our answer." The torches were extinguished, and low, ominous chanting began to echo through the hall. Then the great statues of the Egyptian gods gleamed in a pool of light as the priests chanted their names. Mut, Nut, Khnum, Ptah, Hemsut, Sokar, Nemebet, Ra. The show was dazzling. Lights, shadowy figures, and finally snakes that slithered up, down and around Moses' snake, and even around Moses himself. Hotep and Hoi were masters of spectacle. Then came the most amazing sight of all. Moses' snake consumed the other snakes. Hotep and Hoi proudly took their bows, not seeing whose was truly the or took their bows, not seeing whose was truly the greater power. Later, Ramses and Moses spoke privately without the crowds. "Do you still not understand what Seti was?" Moses asked his brother. "His hands bore the blood of thousands of children." "Slaves," said Ramses. "My people," said Moses, "and I can no longer hide in the desert while my people suffer. Ramses, you must listen. You must let the Hebrews go." But Ramses said, "I do not know your God, neither will I let your people go." Then he added, "Tell your people that as of today, their workload has been doubled." Doubled. Oh my. Let me just check the pages. This, as I said, this is a longer story than I normally read. So I'm on to page 30, and which gives us 15 more pages to read. Just to let you guys know. Outside the palace, the slaves grumbled. The slaves grumbled bitterly at Moses. They threw mud in his face, and he fell to the ground. "Why don't you go back to the desert?" they spat at him. "When did you start caring about slaves?" Aaron asked sarcastically. It was as if Aaron spoke for all Hebrews who doubted the promises of their so-called deliverer. But then Miriam stepped forward. Her fierce gaze silenced the crowd and humbled Moses, who recognized her at once. "You shame yourself," she said to Aaron. Miriam spoke softly to Moses, but her words were as strong as stone. "God has never answered my prayers until now. God saved you from the river and saved you in all your wanderings. God will not abandon you, so don't you abandon us." With renewed determination, Moses stood and turned towards Ramses' barge, floating placidly on the nearby Nile. Moses called out across the river, "Ramses, let my people go." Ramses flicked his hand, motioning to the oarsmen to move the barge along. Moses pleaded with his brother, who finally cried, "Enough!" and ordered his guards to capture Moses. But Moses moved first. He looked heavenward and, at God's command, placed his staff in the water. The blue water of the Nile turned to blood. People screamed, scattering from the river's edge. "We are going to demonstrate the superior might of our gods," Hotep said, pulling red powder from inside his sleeve and throwing it into a bowl of water. Even though the magician's trick caused doubt among the people, Moses spoke without fear. "Believe," he said, "for now we will see God's wonders." As Moses had warned, God sent great suffering upon the land of Egypt. God had commanded Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go, but Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen. So God sent plagues upon the land. God sent frogs, then swarms of lice and flies. Boils covered the skin of both people and beasts. The skies rained with fiery hail. The plagues were everywhere, in homes and streams and streets, in food and drink, in cattle and sheep. The plagues were even in people's dreams. Before each plague, Moses again asked his brother to let the Hebrews go. Still, Ramses refused. In the ninth plague, God sent darkness so heavy that monuments toppled under the weight of it as it spread. Again Moses approached Ramses, and for a moment they remembered their lives as princes, switching the heads of the statues of the gods and getting into trouble. Trouble they could always get out of. Why can't things be the way they were before? Asked Ramses. Just then Ramses' son entered the throne room, a torch clutched in his hand. Father, I'm frightened, the boy said. Seeing Moses, he asked, Why is he here? Isn't he the man who did all this? Ramses, warned Moses, something else is coming. Something much worse than anything before. Please, think of your son. I do, answered Ramses. My father had the right idea about how to deal with your people, and I think it's time I finished the job, he continued, pointing to the wall that depicted the death of the firstborn. Moses knew that the final plague had been given form. Ooh. Moses returned to Goshen and told the Hebrew slaves, The Lord has spoken to me again. The Lord said, Take a lamb, and with its blood mark the lintel of every door. For tonight I shall pass through the land of Egypt, and smite all the firstborn. But when I see the blood upon your door, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not enter. The Hebrews did as the Lord commanded. As night fell, every Hebrew mother grasped her children in fear and awaited the coming plague. Like a smoky mist of light that stretched down from the sky, the 10th and final plague swept through the city. Seeing the blood upon the doors, the plague passed over the homes of the Hebrews. But the plague entered the unmarked doors of the Egyptians and took the life of every firstborn son with a sound like the gentle exhaling of breath. No Egyptian family was spared, not even Pharaoh's. When the plague ended, there were wailing cries of grief throughout Egypt. Moses entered the throne room for the last time. He found Ramses hunched over the lifeless body of his young son. As Moses watched, Ramses gently pulled a linen cover over his son's face. Without lifting his head or turning, Ramses told Moses coldly and with immense pain, You and your people have my permission to go. Moses reached out his hand toward Ramses in a wordless gesture of love. Leave me, Ramses shouted, enraged at Moses' touch. Moses watched as Ramses bent down and touched his forehead to his sons. As Moses turned to leave, Ramses raised his head, a chilling look of fury and hatred in his eyes. Outside the palace, Moses was overcome. He stood silently for a moment, then bowed his head against a broken column, sank to his knees, and wept. After his grief had quieted, Moses left the palace. As he approached Miriam's house, he saw her step forward from the doorway. Looking into her brother's eyes, Miriam saw the promise of freedom, but she also saw terrible loss. Taking his hand, she sought to express all that was in her heart. Many nights we prayed with no proof anyone could hear. In our hearts a hopeful song we barely understood. There can be miracles when you believe. The news spread quickly throughout Goshen. Pharaoh had relented at last and set the Hebrews free. The Hebrews hastily gathered their belongings and loaded them onto carts led by goats and oxen. With Moses in the lead, the growing crowd walked through the abandoned work sites and ruins of the once mighty Egypt. Softly at first, and then with great joy and strength, the children began to sing, Asherai Adonai, I sing to the Lord. Zipporah and Miriam helped Moses lead the way. As the Hebrews poured out of the gates of Egypt and into the desert, they sang and danced. Among the thousands were parents and children, strangers and friends. In their songs, the Hebrews gave thanks for their freedom from Pharaoh, whose stubbornness had brought misery upon all of Egypt. When the Hebrews came to the Red Sea, they rested a few days. Suddenly they heard a rumbling in the distance. A shofar sounded. Then they turned to witness a horrible sight. Over a far-off hill, Pharaoh's army was advancing upon them. In panic, they turned to Moses. Then, to their amazement, the sea itself heaved and boiled with a thunderous roar. In a furious explosion, a great pillar of fire burst from the water and flew over the heads of the Hebrews. The pillar blazed a path between the Hebrews and the Egyptians, blocking the army's way. Again the Hebrews turned to Moses. "We're trapped here!" screamed the frightened people. "How can we escape?" Moses walked toward the edge of the sea and looked at his staff, then up toward heaven. He again heard God say, "With this staff you shall do my wonders." Moses walked into the sea and placed his staff into the water. As the Hebrews drew back in amazement, the sea surged and parted, revealing a winding pathway between two towering walls of water. The Hebrews stood awestruck and afraid. No one wanted to be the first to venture into that strange corridor of land in the midst of the sea. Precious time elapsed until a tall, familiar figure stepped forward from the crowd. Aaron walked towards Moses. His smile said that he no longer doubted and that they were brothers again. Aaron turned and stepped boldly into the cavern of water. The other Hebrews watched and then followed, making their way through the boulders and mud of the sea bottom. Their path was treacherous. People fell and carts broke, but they helped each other. As the Hebrews walked or stumbled along, they looked up in amazement at the great fish gliding silently beside them, just a few feet away behind the wall of water. Moses urged them on. On the far shore, the pillar of fire sank into the ground, and for the first time the Egyptians could see the parted waters of the Red Sea. Like their horses, the Egyptian soldiers were afraid. The miracle was too much for them. Ramses shouted, "Don't just stand there! Kill them! Kill them all!" The soldiers charged into the parted waters, with Ramses following in relentless pursuit. "The soldiers! They're coming!" Moses shouted. As Moses and the last of the Hebrews climbed to safety, the walls of water crashed down. Every Egyptian was drowned, except for Ramses, who was flung back into the distant shore. "Moses!" Ramses shouted. "Goodbye, brother," said Moses, looking back yet seeing nothing but the surface of the sea. Free at last and finally out of danger, the exultant Hebrews sang of faith and thanks. They danced and embraced one another. Moses approached his sister Miriam, whose faith in him had never wavered. "Thank you," he said. Zipporah then stepped forward from the crowd. She put her hand on Moses' shoulder with joy and amazement. She turned him around to look at the great mass of Hebrews in celebration. "Look," she told him. "Look at your people, Moses. They are free." As the Hebrews walked onward, they sang the song of the sea. They sang of God's power, holiness, and majesty. "Deliver us," they sang. "Deliver us to the promised land." Their joyful song echoed up to heaven, and many voices joined to praise God's glorious triumph. The Hebrews wandered for about 3 months in the desert wilderness until they came to Mount Sinai. It was in this holy place that God handed down the 10 Commandments, the laws of right and wrong for the peoples of the world. Moses was God's messenger once more. And that is the Prince of Egypt. Woo! That was a long one. Thank you all for sticking around for that reading. Oh, yeah. That is twice as long as normally it takes for me to read two Disney stories, but I was so thrilled to find that in the little lending library, and you never know when you go to check out those, and I was very happy to bring that to you guys. You're welcome. You're welcome, Mark, and thank you guys for listening and watching. And probably appropriate that this is a kind of a super special, a longer edition because it is going to be a couple weeks um, before I am live again. Um, um, I announced it New Year's Eve, and I'm gonna announce it again here. And I do have a community post that I just put up, as well as I'll be posting on my social media again. But um, I am going on a brief sabbatical just for a couple of weeks, just to step away and rest and recharge. And I will be back on January the 21st. That is Tuesday. That will be Let's Talk Turkey. And this will just give me time to plan for the channel and breathe and kind of avoid burnout like I've done in the past couple years of the channel, where I've gone really hard and heavy on the channel, and then I just kind of get burned out. So I'm planning my breaks into my schedule, and I will be back on um, January the 21st. And Arjon's welcome in. Hello, Richard. Um, so with that, guys, that is going to wrap up this edition of Once Upon a Turkey Leg. And if anyone is watching on the replay, thank you so much for bearing with me to the bitter end of that very long, important story. And let me know in the comments that you were watching on the replay. And everyone watching, if you have not, bop that like button for me. And if you're watching and you have not subscribed to the channel, I invite you to go ahead and subscribe. Very grateful for the growth I experienced in 2024, and I'm looking forward to the further growth that I'll have in 2025. But yeah, um, so thank you guys all again very much. Have a blessed and gobbletastic night. I'll see you in a couple of weeks after my sabbatical. So thank you guys and take care. Happy New Year as well.